Mm, Gosh, I love it when that morning coffee hits so well. Hey everyone, welcome back to the landscape photography series. Today we're going to talk about something really important, and that is exposure. Getting the right exposure in landscape can make or break your photos. Landscapes are easy. Getting up early in the morning, sometimes hard, but it's alright. I'm going to break it down in some simple steps, and so let's get into it. So, first off, what is exposure? In simple terms, exposure is how much light is coming through the camera and hitting your sensor. There are three settings that control this. We talked about it in manual mode. It is going to be your aperture, which correlates your DOF or depth of field, your shutter speed, which correlates to how quick your camera takes said photo, and then your ISO, which stands for International Standard Organization, right? It is an acronym, and a lot of people don't know that. These work together to determine how bright or how dark your photo is going to be. So let's take a closer look at this, right? So first up, we have aperture. What is aperture? Well, think of aperture as your eyeball and your lens. They both correlate to each other, right? It's the opening of your lens and it's the pupils of your eye, okay? A small aperture like f11, f16, it's going to be a really small hole compared to like 1, which is going to be really wide, right? You know, imagine me shooting like this and you can't even see my face, but if it was like that, you can, right? And that's what we're talking about. Well, your eye, think of it in this way. You're in the mountains, a snow day, and you have no sunglasses on, it snowed, it's high noon, your pupils are going to be really small because of how bright that scene is. Now, devil's advocate, you're in the exact same location at midnight with a full moon, your pupils are going to be big, right? It's going to let in more light. And it's also going to dictate what is or is not in focus within the scene. So for landscape, you usually want to use a small aperture between f8 and f16 to make sure everything is sharp from your foreground to your background. I never shoot more than f16 because you're going to run into diffraction, but that's something we'll talk about in a different video, okay? So next up is shutter speed. Shutter speed, this is controlling how long your camera is exposed to the light. So your camera is shut. A fast shutter speed like 1/500th of a second is great for freezing motion and stuff like that. So it's gonna, it's gonna go fast, right? A slow shutter speed like 1/30th of a second, it's gonna be a little slower, but you're gonna have some motion blur maybe, okay? A long and slow shutter speed is interesting because this is where the fun gets in. When you use a slow shutter speed, it lets in more light and it can create beautiful effects like smooth waterfall, soft clouds, light trails, and so on. For landscape, slow shutter speeds seem to work especially well, especially when you're using a tripod. Now, the wind can be a little tricky sometimes, so just keep that in mind. And finally, ISO, also known as the International Standard Organization. This controls how sensitive your camera is to light. In bright daylight, you want to keep it low, around 50 to 200, and in low light, like early mornings or evenings, you may even want to bump that up until you understand how they all correlate together, the exposure triangle. Once we understand that, then you can start playing with it. But remember, if you adjust one, you have to adjust the other, okay? Otherwise, if you go too high on your ISO, let's say you want to crank it up to 5,600, right? You're going to notice it's going to look kind of grainy. Why? Because that sensor is extremely sensitive to light. And to help you get the perfect exposure, at the very bottom of your camera, you're going to have a light meter. Usually it's displayed as a little scale on the screen or in the viewfinder. As you adjust your aperture, your shutter speed, and ISO, you want to keep an eye on this meter and to keep it in the middle or to the left or to the right. It just depends on the scene, to ensure your image is either too bright or too dark. And so one of the things that you want to think about is having your histogram displayed, but we'll talk about that in a different video. So when you're out shooting landscape, you want to remember to balance these three settings. Start with your aperture. So pick f8 and stick with it. Then adjust your shutter speed. In my case, I do mine a little differently. In my order, I set my aperture at f8, f11. I set my ISO to 50, and then I adjust my shutter speed accordingly. Okay? And with a little practice, you will nail the exposure every single time. So, hopefully you enjoyed that. Hopefully it helped you out. We're going to talk about a lot of cool stuff coming up here soon, and that's pretty much it for today's video. If you found this to be helpful, please be sure to like and subscribe, and in the next video, we're going to cover some more stuff. Have a good day, my friends. Cheers.